Today, thank you. Today we are joined by Hannah Needle and Sally Blanchflower from Tapestry Compliance. Hannah is Legal Director and member of the Tapestry Board. She advises on the implementation and continuing operation of all types of executive and employee share and incentive plans, and advises on tax and legal matters, as you'd expect. Hannah is the co-chair of the Share Plan Lawyers Regulatory Committee, and her accolades include Tax Lawyer of the Year 2017 by Women in Law. And Sally is a senior associate who advises on all aspects of global and UK share plans for leading global companies and banks. She has facilitated various design workshops to help her clients with design, launch and implementation of new global plans from scratch. And Sally leads Tapestry's customized in-house client training sessions, global webinars and client roundtable programs. And today, Hannah and Sally are joined by Anne Steele, Company Secretary at Future PLC, a leading FTSE 250 media company. And the company name I remember clearly from my days in the 1990s working in the games department at Virgin and HMV. All the very best games magazines came from Future. Prior to joining Future, Anne was interim Deputy Company Secretary at James Fisher & Sons and Coates Group PLC, and she was previously Deputy Company Secretary at DS Smith PLC. And as part of her role, Anne has administered a number of international share plans over the years. Now, of course, this time of year, we have the annual invitation window for many all-employee plans quickly approaching. Your ESPPs, your share safe relaunches and your new plans. And companies are refocusing on how they can build their all-employee plans back better for 2021. There are obviously some new plans being launched while others are revisiting their current ones. But common to all of these is an increased focus on employee engagement and increasing that all-employee take-up figure and improving plan effectiveness. Sally and Hannah will talk to us about what they're seeing companies doing this year, as well as providing various design tips and tricks. And they will also shine the spotlight on Future's brand new value creation plan, which is something a wee bit different from the usual model. Now, if you've attended any of our webinars before, you'll remember that we do encourage delegate participation, and we always appreciate questions from the audience. So please do make use of the Q&A and the chat facility. And as I always say, there genuinely is no such thing as a daft question, but if you are a wee bit concerned, you can always ask your question anonymously. We will interrupt the flow of the presentation if we have quick, simple questions that can be answered there and then, but for anything a bit more chunky, we will save until the end of the session. So please do feel free to keep them coming as we progress through the presentation. I'll be back at the end to pose some questions to Hannah, Sally and Anne. And I also have some key dates for your diary. But without further ado, let me hand over now to Hannah and take it from here, please, Hannah.
Thank you. So firstly, thank you to Murray and the ProShare team for inviting us to speak here today to you all. And I just want to kind of welcome everybody, as Murray has, add my welcome to all of you listening in today. We're very happy to have you here with us. So as Murray mentioned, Sally and I are both from Tapestry. So I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to introduce Tapestry to you if you don't already know who we are. So we are a boutique law firm specialising in employee and executive incentives. We're the largest incentives team in a UK law firm. We've got nearly 20 lawyers working exclusively in this area with us. And we've won lots of awards for what we do. And we're really excited that in October last year, we became employee owned. So the entire company is now in the hands of its employees. And that's particularly relevant this week as it's Employee Ownership Day tomorrow. And we're going to be celebrating that in a number of ways with the Employee Ownership Association, which is fantastic. We mainly work with large global companies, often operating their plans in many countries. And we work with a network of law firms around the globe who support us in providing our advice to our clients. And we also offer a leading online database called OnTap, which allows companies 24/7 access to legal and tax information in terms of operating their plans in over 150 countries. So that's a little bit about who we are. And would you please like to tell us a little bit about who Future PLC is?
Certainly. So Future is a FTSE 250 listed company. It's a leading media company which is built on scalable and diversified brands and titles, and recently acquired the Go Compare business. It's got employees in the UK, US, Australia, Canada, Czech Republic and France.
Thanks, Anne, and I'm sure many people recognise a number of the brands that were on that previous slide there. Particularly, whenever I see Horse and Hounds, I always think it always makes me think of Notting Hill.
Thank you both. Well, what are we going to cover today? So Murray's given us a bit of an intro already, but just to go into a bit more detail. So Hannah and I are going to start off in terms of reassessing your global all-employee plan offering. So as Murray said, this year we've seen a lot of activity in terms of people either wanting to launch new all-employee plans, particularly on a global scale, or wanting to revisit their existing offering. And so people that haven't got plans already are wanting to do them. And I think that's for a number of reasons. It might be a cash saving exercise at the moment when things have been a little bit hard during the past year. They might want to use this as a tool to really kind of unify their brands and their employees across their markets. And market competition, you know, most of the FTSE 100 have an all-employee plan. A lot of the FTSE 100 have a global all-employee plan, and they're becoming increasingly common. So I think that is a real trend that's kind of setting in, where if you don't already have one, it is something that people are thinking about. So we always get the million-dollar question in terms of what type of plan is most popular, what's everybody else doing, how can we make our plans better, how can we really increase those engagement scores and kind of make our plans really successful. So that was the drive behind today's webinar. We thought we'd get this panel together and share what we've seen our clients and other companies in the market doing over the past few months. And then, as Murray said, moving on to shining that spotlight on Anne. So Future have a really, really exciting new plan called a value creation plan. It's not your traditional all-employee plan model. So we thought it would be great to hear from Anne today to explain how that plan works and perhaps give you something different in terms of food for thought for a different plan type of structure. And then finally, time for any questions. So as Murray said, please do share those throughout as we're going. We'd like this to be a discussion to the extent anyone's got anything to add or wants to ask us what we're talking about, or particularly to Anne about how that plan works and how successful it's been. So please do get in touch and we'll do our very best to keep an eye on the chat box and answer those as we go. Okay, so Hannah's going to kick us off looking at plan types and what we're seeing and kind of tips and tricks here.
Thanks, Sally. So the first step, if you're thinking about reassessing your global offering, is to think about your plan generally. So there are lots of different types of plans that a company might think about offering on an all-employee basis. There are more traditional models. So those might include purchase plans. So where an employee buys shares from their salary or perhaps from their bonus, with the purchase then normally taking place soon after the deduction has been taken from that salary or bonus. And that could be itself done in a couple of different ways. So it could be a discounted purchase plan. So the employee buys the shares from salary at a discount to the normal share price, perhaps a 15 or 20% discount to share price at that time. Or it could be a purchase plan that then has also got a matching element. So the individual buys shares from the salary and the company provides a free matching share. So for example, buy one, get one free, or get a free share for every two that you buy, something like that. Also kind of in the kind of purchase plan kind of model are savings plans. So employees save up over a set period, that might be over 3 years, for example, and they buy the shares at the end, normally with some kind of discount to the price when they buy it. It might be a discount to the price at the start, a 20% discount, for example, or a discount to the price at the end when the shares are actually bought. And those are all kind of plans which obviously have some kind of contribution being made from the employee themselves. They're having to use some of their own money in order to participate, and they're quite common on an all-employee basis. But other types of plans that you might also see are market value option plans. So we know some companies who use market value option plans on an all-employee basis. So with those, you wouldn't have any savings running alongside them, but the individuals would still be buying shares after a set period, so at the price normally set at the outset at market value, whatever the share price is when the award is granted. Hopefully, with share price rising, that means that at the end they'll be buying at a discount to market value. But normally you'd end up selling some of the shares to cover that cost, for example, rather than them having to save up to pay the exercise price. Or you might operate it a bit like a share appreciation right, a SAR, so that the individual would get the number of shares that are worth the increase in value between the time when the award was granted and the time when it's vested or it's been exercised. So that's another way, another kind of plan that you might operate on an all-employee basis. Or you might do something really quite simple and do a kind of free share plan. So that might be upfront shares with no restrictions that you just give totally free to your employees. It might be something that is a right to get shares in the future, which you structure as an option or perhaps an RSU, a conditional award that vests in the future so long as the individual stays employed with the company. That may have some kind of performance related target on it in order to vest, but often that's not the case in an all-employee context. So they're the kind of plans that you might typically see companies using. Some are more popular than others, but they're all the kinds of things that we've seen companies use on an all-employee basis. And many of these can be offered with some kind of tax advantages associated with them in the UK as well, as long as you structure them in line with the appropriate legislation. So, for example, if you were looking for doing a purchase with a match plan, or if you were looking at operating free shares, you might look at doing a share incentive plan, a SIP. If you were thinking about doing a savings plan, you might have an SAYE. If you were looking at market value options, you might want to consider doing a CSOP in the UK. And some of them you might even be able to get tax advantages abroad as well, depending on the type of plan you're looking at. So if you were offering them as free shares, you might be able to look at a Macron plan in France, or if you were doing a discounted purchase plan, for example, you might be able to offer a Section 423 plan, and that's what it's called in the US. If you were doing a savings plan, you could offer an Irish tax advantaged SAYE, for example. They're just examples of the kind of things that you might be able to do abroad. There are others as well. Now, we're not specifically focusing on tax advantaged arrangements in today's talk. Some of what we are going to be talking about can be applied to tax advantaged type of plans as well. But obviously, if you're thinking about putting one of those in place, or you're thinking about changing the way that you use those, you do need to check that what you're doing works within the local tax regime so that you don't adversely impact the tax advantage status of that plan. But really the key in kind of thinking about your plan itself and what you're offering within your plan is for the company to focus on what is fit for purpose for them. So what is fit for purpose for you, rather than thinking about what everybody else is doing. So really kind of thinking about going back to the drawing board, what are our key objectives in operating this plan? Do you want employee engagement through them buying in and investing their own money, in which case you might be thinking about a purchase plan? Or is the individual's money not being at risk a key factor, in which case you might be looking at a savings plan where they could get them back if they want to withdraw over the period before they buy the shares? Do you want immediate alignment with shareholders, in which case you might be looking at a purchase plan, or you might be looking at a free share plan with no restrictions, for example? That might be what fits the bill. And thinking about what you want and what your objectives are and what then fits those objectives, is that the kind of plan that you've got? Can you work within what you already have, perhaps with some tweaks, and we'll come on to talk about those a bit more? Or is it looking like you might need to think about a new plan in order to be able to meet those objectives? What's right for one company won't necessarily be what's right for another, and companies shouldn't just assume that traditional frameworks are always going to work the best for them. And there'll be more from Anne in terms of Future's quite unique approach to this in a few moments. So another thing to think about is what type of awards you're offering, and where there's an opportunity for you to do more within the framework of a plan that you already have. So if you don't currently offer them, could you make an award of free shares? This might be to kickstart a new plan or to celebrate a success. So it could be a company anniversary, it could be an IPO, for example, and you want to celebrate that and give some free shares to your employees. Now, a good example of this is BT have been embracing this in recent years. So just last year, they gave all of their staff, 100,000 employees, £500 in free shares, which they said was to boost morale, to give everybody a stake in the company, to share in its success. And then this year, they've done something slightly different. They've given their frontline workers, so that's about 60,000 of their employees, £1,500 bonus for recognition of their really hard work through the pandemic. That's another way that they could be used. And they've done that as a mixture of cash and free shares. Now, I'm seeing that our slides have just disappeared. I think Sally's just working in the background to get those coming up in the right order for you, but I'll carry on. I'm just talking about the different things that you could think about doing with your award types. So if you've got a purchase plan, could you think about offering a match or offering a discount if you don't already? That's obviously likely to increase participation, increase that kind of motivation and investment levels potentially as well. One interesting development that we've been seeing on this front recently, particularly amongst tech companies, is to offer a purchase plan and then the company may be paying a cash bonus instead of offering a matching free share or offering a discount, but paying a cash bonus in addition. And that might itself be used to invest in further shares, that cash bonus. It has a similar effect to a discounted purchase price or to a free share, but that might be easier from a tax perspective, for example, might be simpler to explain to people. Now, if retention isn't a key driver for the plan, could you consider removing any holding periods or restrictions that apply to the awards to make it a more attractive offering? Or could you offer to reinvest dividends paid on any shares that individuals hold under the plan in buying further shares? Or could you think about offering to pay an amount equivalent to any dividends that are paid over the vesting period if individuals don't hold those shares, if that's something that you don't already offer as an additional incentive? Now, whilst it's not a particular type of award, another thing to think about is that it's a really good idea to keep an eye on your global footprint and consider whether you're rolling out the plan in all the jurisdictions that you can or all the jurisdictions that you want to at the moment. So where you're based might have changed quite a lot for some companies in the last 18 months as workplaces have adopted a more kind of fluid form. So there might be new countries that you have employees in, or it might be that there are now countries with larger populations that perhaps ought to be added to the plan now. Or it might just be that the last time you looked, it was difficult to offer the plan in a particular country. So you're not doing that at the moment for legal compliance or tax reasons, for example, but you haven't checked that position for a while. And it's time to give the advice you had, say, 3 years ago, a bit of a refresh, just to see if things have changed and if that might be a new country that you want to open the plan up to and offer the plan to employees in that jurisdiction. So a number of different things that you can think about within the scope of what you already have in terms of being able to offer maybe things slightly differently or offering slightly more as an additional incentive in using your plan in a slightly different way to achieve different objectives perhaps. So I'm now going to pass over to Sally, who's going to talk to us about thinking about kind of within the plan, going a little bit deeper into it again, kind of thinking about maybe tweaking some of those key structural elements.
Thanks, Hannah, and terribly sorry, as you can see, always the technical issues which get in our way. I'm now on the right slide. I don't know what was happening with the one before, so do apologise about that. So yes, structural elements. Once you've got your plan type either agreed for a new plan or you've gone back and revisited your structure of your existing plan, there's some things that you can then think about and kind of reassess to hopefully increase the engagement and the take-up for your plan and make it actually work more effectively. So quite often we see people that have plans in place, but they're just not working to the best of their ability. And it's quite frustrating for the company when they've spent a lot of time and money and effort in terms of launching these plans. They're really excited about them. And then it might just be that the take-up doesn't reflect what they were trying to achieve. And it can sometimes come down to some really simple terms or tweaks that they could make to make those plans work better. So award size. Perhaps that free share award that you've given just isn't quite big enough. Perhaps when you convert it into local currency, it's just not meaningful. So sometimes maybe it might be a good idea to go back to the drawing board in terms of what does that value look like to our employees? What about our average salaries? How is this kind of number positioned? And if we are operating it on a global scale and translating it to local currency, do we need to make any changes to make that equally worthwhile in those local jurisdictions? Then in terms of your kind of investment or your contribution level, this is a key one that I've seen people get really wrong. If you're going to set your contribution window either too high or too low, it might mean that the take-up of the plan just is never going to get off the ground properly. So I've seen companies really go back to their data and see, okay, how much do our people get paid? How much does the average employee get paid? Again, looking at all of your different jurisdictions, because they might be very different. And then have a think about what is an actually sensible window which we should be asking people to contribute within. So if it's £5 to £50, is that not really going to be worth it? If it's £500 to £1,000, is that just going to kind of alienate most of your workforce? And I've seen one company in particular take their take up from about 11%, kind of up to, I think, over about 30% just by changing this one lever. So I think it is a key one to keep under review, and it also might change over time as your company grows, as salaries might potentially grow or shift. Maybe as you have different types of workers working for you, do keep an eye on your data and your population and what they're getting paid to see whether this is sensible or not. Likewise with your matching ratio, there's probably no point in saying somebody has to buy 10 shares to get one free. If you are at that sort of match, is this really the right type of plan for you? And is that really the type of plan that's going to drive the best behavior? Potentially no. It might be just optically that it's better to phrase that as a discount or structure the plan in a slightly different way to get more buy-in. But the matching ratio is key. So obviously companies have to work out what they can afford, but then think about what that message is saying. Buy one, get one free, very simple, really easy to understand, and has great take up. Some companies might not be able to afford that, but like we said, if you're starting to get into the kind of higher regions of you have to buy a real large number of shares before you're going to get anything back, then that might not be the most incentivizing. Forfeiture terms. So what do you actually want to happen in terms of people getting this award, and how long do they have to stay with you to get the award for? And if they leave, are you going to still give them the award? I've seen a number of companies actually go back to the drawing board on this, and it ties into the holding period piece below. But it's really thinking about how long do we really want to tie our all employee population into a plan? We've heard lots of kind of stories and great lobbying and conversations with and through ProShare about let's get that kind of plan cycle period of a SIP down from the 5-year period. It's just too long for millennials. And I think the same goes for the global all employee plans. If it's quite a small amount, given today's workforce moves around and moves between jobs a lot more frequently than perhaps in the past, is it actually really key that you want to tie somebody into a cycle for 3 years or maybe possibly longer, just for them to get quite a small value as a result? So some companies have literally scrapped that. They say, no, all we want people to do is become a shareholder. So we're going to have no forfeiture terms. There's no holding period. We just want to be able to allow our employees to buy shares in our company, be shareholders from day one, think like shareholders, act like shareholders, and hopefully they will keep their shares, retain them, and invest in the business kind of through their attitude in that way. So really reducing all forfeiture terms and reducing all holding periods down to nothing. And those plans have really great success as well. So don't always think that you have to lock people into a long period, but it might be that it's appropriate for you, especially if you're trying to do something like a UK SIP or an SAYE, where there's an obvious timing framework there already in place. Okay, so those are the structural things we think you can look at. And then finally, mechanical provisions. So what we're thinking about here is, what are those other levers that you could slightly tweak to maybe get the best out of your plan? And when I say get the best out of your plan, that's on one hand, getting that better take up and engagement from your employees. But on the other hand, it's making things simpler for you as a company or an administrator. So we often see people designing plans that sound really exciting, but they're really, really complicated. And they have activity under the plans that needs to be dealt with every single month. So there's purchases, there's vests, there's matches, there's levers. It's all happening, and it's all happening all of the time. And if you're doing that in a number of countries, that's a full-time job, and you might not have people to kind of actually manage that sensibly. So what are some of the things that you could maybe tweak to make this a bit easier? And sometimes it might make it simpler for employees to understand as well. So frequency of purchase. Maybe you're taking money from people monthly, and maybe you're buying shares monthly. That has its advantages because you're getting shares to them straight away, and it's meaning that you're not sitting on their money for a long time, but it's requiring monthly activity. Might it perhaps be more sensible to store those savings up and perhaps buy every quarter, or maybe sometimes even every year, so that you only have one purchase event? Similarly, in terms of the vesting, even if you are purchasing every month or every quarter, does it mean that you have to have a vesting that ties to that month, perhaps an anniversary of that month or that quarter? Or could you have a kind of cliff edge vesting at the end of a certain period? So maybe buying over 1 year, and then you have one vesting that happens at a particular point in time after that year is concluded. So we still do see people that have vestings happening all the times under these plans, and I think it's one of the things that makes it more difficult. Again, with the structure and the timing of the match, do you want to be applying that match every time you buy the shares? Or if you're allowed to, and you're not working within kind of UK SIP framework, would it be maybe better to just award the match in one bulk at the end of the period? So see what people have saved, see what they're walking away with, and then give them the match. Share sourcing, you might want to flip between perhaps new issue, market purchase, treasury shares. We're seeing a lot of people going back to the drawing board there in terms of what shares do they have available as a company, what's best at the moment in terms of the cash share balance, and what's easiest. Do you need a trust, etc. And then finally, levers and mobiles. And this ties into actually kind of the vesting frequency and some of the other points I've already mentioned. Some people have levers that they then want to deal with every month. Some people under their plans only deal with levers maybe at the next annual vesting that's happening under their plan, or maybe the next quarterly vesting. So instead of having to deal with it straight away, you will say if somebody leaves, yes, they're going to get their shares, but they're not going to get them until the next normal planned vesting event under the plan. And this can really reduce the admin burden on how many times you have to process the awards that you're delivering to people. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some food for thought in terms of things that you might be looking at on your plans. And we are now going to turn on to a focus on future. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Hannah is hopefully going to play us an animation, which before you hear anything from Anne should set the scene in terms of how Future's plan works.
Thanks, Sally. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So Future recently put in place a new, quite different type of all-employee plan, as we've mentioned, that they call their Future Value Creation Plan. So we're just going to watch a short video now that was shared with employees, and then Anne is going to tell us a little bit more. But this video should hopefully explain a little bit as a kind of snippet before we do that. So let's see if we can get that working for you. Well, I'm sure we'd all love to jet off to the beach for a break, as Carol is doing. But I hope you enjoyed that video. I certainly find it very hard not to bop as I'm listening to it and watching it. So if anybody noticed that, that's what I was doing and why I was doing it. Anne, that was a great little video to start us off. And we've got some of the key features of the plan on the slide here, but can you tell us a little bit more about the plan and how it works, please? Because it is quite unusual. I think it's worth spending a few minutes so we just understand it a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. So as the video explained, it's a one-off award of units, which has been provided to all of our employees, which is about 2,300 people. And there's a percentage of additional shareholder value created, which is denominated in future shares over the next 3 to 5 years. There's a hurdle that has to be reached in order for that to vest, and the number of units they get is based on their role, their salary, and their length of service. The units will vest based on the value created, as we said, over 3, 4, and 5 years. There's 3 tranches, and the measurement dates are September 23, September 24, and September 25. The participants have all been allocated their individual share, which reflects the number of, sorry, when the award vests, they'll be allocated an individual shares based on the value created above the hurdle and based on the number of units they hold. And that gets converted into shares based on the share price at the vesting date. There are things around, good leavers, bad leavers, as you and Sally referred to in terms of other plans. We've got 2 executive directors in the plan, and they're subject to an additional holding period. But most people, once they get the shares, they're free to do what they want with them afterwards. So that's kind of a very quick canter through kind of how the plan works. What do you want to ask any additional questions about?
Yeah, that's great. So it's looking at kind of yeah. So it's an interesting piece, because unlike other kind of awards that people might get, there's not an allocated number of shares at the start, is there? People are kind of given units. The kind of value is kind of divided into units, and depending on how much value is created for shareholders over time, essentially employees get to share in that value created. Why it's called a value creation plan, presumably.
Yeah.
And then
that was the bit that was quite difficult to get across to employees, because people didn't quite get what a unit was. People understand what shares are, but trying to explain to them what a unit was one of our kind of communication challenges.
Yeah, because I guess it's a unit now, but what you get at the end is shares, because we take whatever your bit's worth and we work out how many shares that means at that point you should get. Yeah. Okay, and why did Future decide that this was the right plan? Why a value creation plan?
Well, we've got a number of all employee benefits already. The obvious things like pension and healthcare and life assurance, and we have an enhanced leave policy, and there are short-term benefits such as a profit pool. There are country-specific benefits. So we have in the UK, we have a SIP, and in the US, we have an employee stock purchase plan. And for the senior executives, we had a long-term incentive plan, but that wasn't really suitable to be rolled out to all employees. And what we really wanted to do was have a plan that was available to all employees that would help incentivize everybody, help retain our key managers, and enable our employees to share in the value that was being created for shareholders. We've got a very ambitious strategic plan over the next 5 years, and the employees are obviously key to that. So we did some modelling on what was out there in terms of the different plans that we could operate. And this plan we went for because I know everybody, including Hannah, is going to roll their eyes at this point, but it is actually relatively simple to operate. We're in 6 jurisdictions. The chief executive is very keen to sort of kind of grow the business, and we'll probably be rolling out into further jurisdictions in due course. And so from a we're not having to sort of kind of work out how to sort of set up savings accounts in lots of different countries. We're not having to work out how to deduct money from people's payroll, which can get quite complex in certain jurisdictions. They're just getting some units, and then at the end of the vesting period, if we hit the performance targets, they will get some shares. It gets a bit complicated tax-wise, obviously, at that point, but it is a relatively simple plan to operate in that respect. And people could see that, what a unit is worth now. If we grow it, what the unit is going to be worth in 3 years' time, they can kind of see that kind of as a sort of as a thing to incentivize themselves.
That's right. I think we've got a slide, Sally, if you wouldn't mind just flicking on a couple of slides. So in terms of people being able to kind of understand the value of what's been given to them, this slide here shows that there's a kind of tool, isn't there, that people can access and just see, well, if the share price does this, if I've got this many units, then this is what I might end up with at the end.
Yeah, that's what we put, part of our communication we put in place to just help people understand what a unit was as opposed to what a share was.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I guess one of the things, I guess there are a couple of things as well that are quite interesting with this plan, because when companies talk about all employee plans, they're often, if we think particularly about tax advantage plans, and a lot of all employee plans tend to model tax advantage plans, then they tend to be relatively low value, and they also tend to be rolled out relatively equally amongst employees. But the interesting thing about this plan is that that's not necessarily how it works. So it is both incentivizing your wider workforce as well as incentivizing your senior people, because the size of the awards that are being given out, they can differentiate between the different populations, as you said, by role, salary, the different things you've talked about. So I think that is a really interesting aspect about this plan as well.
Yes, and one of the things that we've put in place and we've said to people is that, if somebody gets a senior promotion during the lifetime of the plan, then their award will be topped up to reflect that.
And so, I guess in its very essence, in a sense, it's quite like a conditional award. You get a right to shares in the future, and if we meet certain performance levels, then you get a number of shares in the future. So why did you decide to do it this way, perhaps rather than an RSU?
We just felt that the value creation plan better reflected the entrepreneurial and ambitious culture that future success is based on. It just felt right for us as an organization that this type of plan would sort of kind of speak to our people.
Yeah, I can understand that, but I think it can be quite a scary prospect thinking of doing something new and different, particularly when you're thinking about stakeholder, shareholder reaction. How did it go with your shareholders?
Well, we consulted very closely with the shareholders whilst we were designing the plan, and reflected their constructive feedback in its design. And the plan passed with 64.3% shareholders voting in favour of it. So it wasn't the most popular plan that we could have put out there, but our shareholders did support it.
You got what you needed to.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's been the kind of reaction within the company? How have employees reacted to it?
Very positively. A lot of excitement, and it obviously, the initial explaining up front took a lot of time, and we spent a lot of time on the comms to make sure that it was clear and that people could understand it. We tested it with some focus groups to make sure that it worked with people. But the acceptance rates are over 99%. So lots of excitement, and people very, very keen to sort of kind of to see it succeed, but to participate in it.
That's brilliant. So it's been
it's proving quite useful as well, also for new hires, because we can sort of say to people, we've got this exciting new plan there's not many others out there like this, and if you join us, you get to participate in it, and that's proving quite popular with sort of our recruitment side.
Mm. And I've noticed as well, it's not, as you say, it's not just something that even that internally is something that you're speaking a lot about in terms of new hires and the like, but actually it's something that even if you go on your website, you can watch little videos about it that have been released. There's information about the plan, so it really is something that you as a company are very proud of in terms of what you've done and how exciting that is for you and the value that you can deliver not only to your shareholders but also to your employees at the same time, because that's the whole idea of this plan. It's linking in, if we create lots of value for our shareholders, then the employees can share in that. So I think that's great to see.
And can I ask a question, please? What was the time period between the initial concept and discussions about how you're going to advance this to the go live date? Was it a relatively quick process, or did it take longer than you expected?
Bits of it were very quick. Inevitably, bits of it always take longer than you expect. So the REMCOM first discussed this in September last year, and worked with our advisors on sort of kind of coming up with the plan design, did the consultation with the shareholders. The AGM was in February this year, and then once that had passed and we knew that we'd got shareholder approval for it, we did the award to our future colleagues in April. We're about to do another award to our Goku colleagues who we acquired at the beginning of this year, so we sort of kind of have put them in a separate pot, and then so yes, the sort of, I think from initial REMCOM discussions through to plan design and getting the notice of meeting out actually was quite fast. There was then a kind of waiting period while we were sort of waiting for all the AGM stuff to sort of kind of pass, and then there was another kind of burst of activity once we got the comms out. But we could do a little bit of kind of pre-comms with employees just to start kind of building that up. So we didn't waste our time.
And talking about comms with the employees, and do you have a plan for keeping people engaged? Because obviously there's been a lot of excitement about it now, but then kind of the next thing that will happen is a couple of years' time when you'll have your first vesting in September 2023 or shortly after that. Yeah, do you have a plan for kind of keeping that excitement going?
No, absolutely, yeah. No, it's very important, because otherwise it sort of kind of fades into the background, and who remembers what you got told 2.5 years ago? So yeah, no, we're going to be keeping people up to speed with sort of kind of this is how it's going. There's I don't know whether it said in the video, but there's a wiki page that we sort of kind of keep updated with information about it, and we do sort of kind of comms. Our CEO does kind of monthly town halls, and it often gets mentioned in that. And then there'll be more formal things just sort of kind of going, so this is what we set at the start as the targets, this is how we're doing so far. If this continues, then vesting is yes, no likely to happen. And obviously we've also got people coming in to the business subsequently, and those people are also being invited to join the plan. They'll be time prorated, so they won't get the full award that there's a people in future at the start got, but everybody who joins future between now and vesting will get something, and so there's a lot of kind of communication around that as well.
We have a question from a delegate here, an anonymous delegate, and I suppose it's really directed towards you, Hannah and Sally. And during COVID, have you seen a trend in the type of the plans being used? Is there something that sticks out as being the most popular choice going forward? I'm interested in this future plan. I think it's wonderful, but more widely, is there a trend?
I think whether it's a kind of standalone plan or an award type, we've certainly seen people thinking more and more about free shares. So whether that's under your UK SIP or whether that's doing it under a global kind of matching plan where you might also have the ability to do free shares, I think people have really been thinking about how could we give free shares to all employees. Now, some companies have done that because they might have cut people's salary by 20%, so they need to give something instead. Some people might be trying to do it as a thank you. You've worked really hard this year. It's been terrible. We can't increase your salary. that here's a free share award, and some people are really just trying to, you know, promote that engagement and bring everyone together, and issuing a relatively small number of shares to a lot of people can have really positive effects for doing that. So I think in terms of something different, it's obviously not a new plan type or a new award type, but something that's had a bit of a renewed focus. I would say we've seen more people thinking about that this year.
I think that's right, and I think whilst I wouldn't say that they're, other than the point Sally's made, I wouldn't say there's a natural kind of new trend for a new type of plan that's become really popular. I think the trend that we've seen is this point on companies assessing what they have and what they want and what their objectives are, kind of reassessing, okay, in the world we're in now, what is our all employee plan doing? What do we want it to do? Is it doing the right things? Do we need to have a rethink? And we've seen a lot of companies doing that, reassessing, like we've been talking about today, looking back at what are our objectives and are we meeting them? Do we need to change something?
Excellent.
I think,
sorry, Sally, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the other trend that I think I've seen is quite, well, not surprisingly, but some companies that have really not done great in the past year, they've been hit really, really hard. They're still trying to do an all employee plan and thinking about it and seeing, do they have the budget and getting the internal appetite for it, and they're really excited about it. And I think that's part of their building back better strategy. What can we do next to actually bring our employees back to the kind of fold when it's looked so terrible in the past year? So, you know, you see some names come into your inbox and you think, oh wow, okay, you're doing an all employee plan. I'm thrilled that you're still even going, but this is great news. And you have that conversation with them and you see where they're going with it, and you think, well, that's actually great and that's really exciting. And I think as an industry, that's really good that, you know, one of the tools that a company is looking to first to try and reinvigorate the success of their business and get their employees on board is a share plan. That's exactly what we want these plans to do. So even though that's a bad news story, I think it's got positive effects and hopefully kind of future success that will come out of it.
Excellent. I'm aware that our delegates have been very quiet on the question front. Normally we have a hatful of questions, but perhaps we've answered all their questions already. But I did have a quick question for you, Anne, and I noticed that in the presentation it talked about this being a one-off award. How much has that had to be stressed that it's a one-off award, so that there's not a kind of level of expectation that this is going to become a regular thing? Is that a consideration?
Yes, I mean, it was very much part of the comms that it was a one-off award. As I said, anybody who joins the company between now and vesting will still get a chance to participate. So there will be sort of kind of interim awards for new joiners, and also top-up awards for any senior new hires. But the RemCon was very much sort of kind of focused on sort of, let's get this 3 years, let's see how we're doing with it. And then I suspect we'll be putting something different in place once this has started to kind of move on. But the idea was to get something that just got everybody behind the company and getting that strategic sort of success sort of working.
Excellent. We've had a question from Carla to all panelists. Is the number of units, well, I suppose this is to you initially, Anne, is the number of units determined for all 3 tranches at the start? If someone is promoted and salary level changes during that 3 years, would the number of units be adjusted or remain the same?
Yes, so at the start of the plan, the number of units is set for all 3 tranches. But if somebody does get promoted and their role changes, that their award needs to adjust, and it will be adjusted from the date of their promotion.
Smashing. I hope that answers your question, Carla. I'm aware that we've shot over by about 5 minutes from our advertised end time. I hope no one minds. The number of attendees is still steady. Not many people have dropped off, which is great. I just wanted to check with Hannah and Sally. Was there anything else you wanted to cover before I announce a few dates for the future?
No, thank you very much for having this, though, and thank you everybody for listening.
Yeah, thank
More
you.
than welcome. So I just wanted to quickly talk about the recent launch of the report from the Social Market Foundation, which we hosted, and it had the rather snappy title of A Stake in Success, Employee Share Ownership and the Post-COVID Economy. Now, this report included 14 recommendations for broadening the use of share plans as the UK focuses on the economic recovery post-COVID. Last week, we hosted a follow-up roundtable to discuss and prioritise the recommendations that ProShare will take forward on behalf of the industry. And yeah, Sally was on that, and thanks again, Sally, for your input, always invaluable. We'll be running a second session in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and if you would like to take part, please do email us at team@proshare.org. It's a very informal and friendly discussion, as a roundtable, and it's really, as I say, to decide on what are the key recommendations that we as an industry think we can take forward and realistically have a chance of implementing. So please do get in touch if you would like to join that roundtable. We don't have a confirmed date yet, but as I say, it's not going to be too far into the future. I would imagine sometime in the early part of July. You can download the report, and you can also watch a recording of the launch event from May, and there was followed up by a really good panel discussion with a couple of MPs and a journalist from the Financial Times, Scott Korf, who was from the Social Market Foundation, and our very own wonderful Peter Swaby, Executive Director here. That's all available on the website, our website rather, which is www.proshare.org. Another date for mid-July, again to be confirmed shortly, but the ProShare annual SAYE and SIP survey launch will be announced shortly. Still going through reams of data and putting the report together. So that will be launched sometime within the next 3 to 4 weeks. And then the ProShare annual conference this year, it's being held virtually online over the afternoons of the 29th and Thursday the 30th of September. Employee share plans, the next chapter. If you receive our newsletter, you'll have read all about that yesterday. And if you didn't receive our newsletter yesterday but would like to receive it, please do get in touch with us again, team@proshare.org. And finally, the ProShare annual awards dinner, December the 6th, 2021. Save that date in your diary. This is a physical live event, all being well, fingers crossed and everything. I've already polished my shoes and pressed my trousers. Submissions will be opening in mid-July for people who wish to put forward their plans for an award, and I'm thinking that future one sounds rather interesting. So save the date, December the 6th, 2021, for our annual dinners. Annual dinner and awards, and that's all for today's session. Many thanks again to Anne, Hannah and Sally for a truly engaging and very informative session. Thank you to all of our delegates for joining, and the recording will be made available over the next week or so. So keep an eye out on a lookout on our LinkedIn page and also in our newsletter. But for now, thank you all very much indeed. Hope you have good days, and we will see you all soon. Thank you.